The purpose is to promote construction of broadband infrastructure throughout West Virginia to increase access to broadband service for underserved and unserved households and businesses. What happens in the bill is it requires that funds are created in the Water Development Authority and that they're kept separate from water and sewer funds. The bill requires the Water Development Authority to create and establish a special revolving fund of monies made available by appropriation, grant, contribution, or loan to be known as the West Virginia Infrastructure Fund for Broadband Middle Mile Development. The funds are to be administered by the authority and to be dedicated to broadband middle mile infrastructure projects. The Broadband Enhancement Council will be responsible for overseeing and approving disbursements of funds received through grants. It also specifies oversight of grant monies by the Broadband Enhancement Council and priority of funding. The bill provides for broadband middle mile infrastructure to be owned by the state. Existing broadband infrastructure with a minimum of 144 strands of fiber could be purchased as part of the middle mile infrastructure project. The project is to be open source and to provide free broadband access to government buildings. The cost for access to the middle mile would be the cost of construction, maintaining, and administrating the middle mile network is determined by the Water Development Authority. The authority would be required to establish zones that would be bid out separately to project sponsors, and a sponsor may bid to construct part or all of a zone. Access rights could be granted for up to 20% of the fibers to any one zones per any provider that would like to access those lines. The authority would be required to provide reports to the governor, the legislative manager, the Speaker of the House, and the President of the Senate during each regular session of the legislature on the status of the broadband project. The authority would not be permitted to issue bonds until the authority has identified a repayment source for the bonds, such as income from operations. Also, municipalities and providers must provide a contract and a business plan to the Water Development Authority to prove viability prior to any bonds being sought. That way that the performance bonds that are sought can have guaranteed access, guaranteed providers that are going to be using those lines, or municipalities are going to be using those lines, so that we won't be building lines that no one else is using. The authority would be permitted to issue bonds until they will not be permitted to issue bonds until they have a source of repayment. The Department of Education will be required in this bill to apply for grants related to closing the homework gap. The Department of Health and Human Resources will be required to apply for grants to expand telemedicine, and the Division of Homeland Security will be required to apply for grants to create a secured wire telecommunication system for emergency response. That explains the piece of legislation, Mr. President, the broadband bill. I'll tell you, this bill is one that can really promote the state of West Virginia and move our state forward with broadband access. I'll go ahead and yield to any questions. I reserve the right to close. Thank you, Mr. President.
Questions on passage of the bill? Is there discussion? Senator from Cabell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise up with very serious questions about this bill. And you look at the sponsors of Senate Bill 315, I mean, it's like the dream team in the Senate. So with all due respect to all the sponsors or co-sponsors, here we go. Think of the commercials that we see on television where Comcast Cable is competing in the private sector with DirecTV. And think of Comcast Cable being our plan here to go into potentially 50 years of debt with bonds. We're going to bet on putting things in the ground and delivering broadband, which we all, of course, want and need for economic development and just personal enjoyment. But we're going to go into debt with through the Water Development Authority or the Water Board. And these, you know, it's a little bit like workers' compensation. We're going to be in this business with the public debt that's involved here. So when the private sector competes, that's great. Whether you're going to get your services through the dish or you're going to get it through the cable delivered to your house through the ground or on telephone poles. There's a concept, or there's a product called wireless delivery of broadband. And a wireless delivery of broadband is fixed wireless, local loop services. and it's being used on a provisional way over in Virginia, it's down in Alabama, Georgia, for rural delivery of broadband. And basically it works the same way a dish works, is the loop services deliver it from a tower to your house. So my concern is the Water Board issues these bonds, and we are, as a state, are now in the broadband business, delivery business. We've got this debt, and our technology is obsolete. And the customers can get the service cheaper through wireless delivery of broadband. And yet our taxpayers are committed for 50 years. So I have a couple questions for the Senator in a second, but I'll just say the Water Board is going to deliver, or is going to issue 50 years worth, up to 50 years worth of bonds. I've got to make sure that our taxpayers are not going to be waterboarded. Bad pun, but I mean, we're going to go in debt. So will the gentleman yield?
Well, the senior senator from the 8th yield. Senator yields.
I know this is all well-intentioned, and we definitely are. We're always so desperate in this state to keep up, you know, with the modern world. That's sad to say, but it's true. Tell me the source of payments here for these bonds.
Sure. Well, that's a good question. Actually, we addressed this issue in Government Organizations Committee. We talked about if we just build wires and not have any commitments to utilizing those wires, then we wouldn't have a source of revenue for them. So that's why in committee we required that providers or municipalities come to the Water Development Authority with a business plan, with commitments to getting access to the wires, which is paying for the wires to utilize them, so we have a way to pay back our bonds. That way we're not just building entire sections and not having any commitments whatsoever.
I didn't understand that.
Okay.
Who's paying, who's going to be paying, who are the customers, who's actually paying the money to make sure the bonds get paid, that we don't get stuck with an antiquated technology that we've got to pay for?
Absolutely. Well, it would be private providers, or it would be a municipality. It's seen in both ways. So, example, a private provider would go to the Water Development Authority and say, I will commit to getting on this section of line. And whenever they commit to getting on that section of line, wherever it may be built to, then the Water Development Authority could then seek for a bond in order to, with that proven business plan, to try to get a bond to build that section of line. That way that they're able to then take it out to the private companies. We're just building an interstate and making sure that interstate is open for multiple providers to get onto. Yeah,
but what if everybody's driving drones? The interstate's not going to be relevant.
Well, I'll tell you, the fastest connection is the speed of light, which is done through fiber. You talk about drones, you talk about satellites. I mean, there's latency with that. And even whenever you talked about the wireless connectivity has to be connected to a wired line, even nowadays. So you talk about a software, and I know Ubiquiti is a hardware company that does these wireless loops. I'm very familiar with them, but they still need to be connected. The wireless loops need to be connected to a wired line so they can connect the data from those wireless towers and send it out into the national backbone.
Let me ask you this, and then I'll conclude. I don't know about anybody else's municipality, but my municipality of Huntington is dead broke. If you're going to count on us to be paying money for this, I mean, I just don't understand I understand that certain things won't be actually developed until, you know, there's a rational basis for a bond to be issued. But basically, is it going to be the people who wanted to come to their house or that wanted to come to their business? And are they committed to some kind of long-term contract? Or can they bail whenever something cheaper, more technologically advanced might come along?
You know, I'll speak to the municipality point first. You know, Chattanooga, Tennessee did something like this to do a municipality-type project to get fiber to every home. They saw a $200 million increase to their city's GDP. They stepped out on a limb as a municipality, brought a plan, and created a system to be provided to those households. I mean, this is an option for municipalities. Municipalities don't have to do this. It's an option for providers to go out and get these bonds with the Water Development Authority in the state. Again, they don't have to do it. The business plan has to prove viability, and their performance bonds. If the companies, if New York or whoever we go for bonding does not see that this system can pay for itself, we won't get the bonds. So we did it in as much of an intelligent way as possible to protect the liabilities of the state, and then also to give options in a better way for funding for fiber expansion in West Virginia. Thank you, Senator.
Further discussion. Senator from Upshur.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to start by commending the senator from Putnam County on this bill. This is my industry, and so I know a little bit about it. I think overall I like the bill, and I wish I could support the bill. I think it's about 90% of the way there. And the issue that I have with the bill is that it leaves ownership of this network with the state, and that creates a serious concern for me. And the senator from Cabell actually raised peripherally some of those concerns. But what I'd like to point out is that this is a transportation network. When we think of data moving around, that's literally what it is. And of the issues that we face this year, one of the #1 issues that we face currently today in West Virginia is the fact that we have a transportation network that's falling apart already. We call that our highway system. That's what happens whenever the state owns a network like that. Now, it's easy to make the argument that we do need to fix our highway system, and a highway system is inherently a government function. You can't really have a private highway system. But in the case of a broadband network, that's not true. In most states across the country, there are broadband networks that are entirely privately owned. The government does not have to step in and fill this role. And so what I would point out is that I come from the most rural district in the state, what I think is arguably the most underserved district in the state when it relates to this, and I commend the senator's efforts here, because I do think that government can play a role in encouraging the build-out of such a network, but in the end, I don't think the government should own the network. The senator from Cabell brought very many things into the discussion, and I'll reiterate some of them, but just the idea that once this network is built, that somehow it's going to magically function properly forever. And again, this is my industry. It doesn't work that way. There's a turnover of equipment that has to occur on a regular basis in such a network. And if you don't do that, the network starts to degrade and fall apart. And I just don't believe the state is going to be capable, both financially as well as technically, to maintain such a network. We let people do what they do best, and we have companies in West Virginia that are in this industry that could do a great job. We could encourage them, and this bill has a lot of that in it, but at the end of the day, I don't want to see the state own this network. I want to see a way for the state to dispose of this network. And so if this bill is reported out of here today, I'm hoping, and I've had some discussion with folks on the other end of the hallway here, that we can look for a way to bring that about so that this bill then is something that I could support. But this one issue for me is inviting a decrepit old network to be what we call our state network, and I don't think it's a good idea for the state of West Virginia, so I reluctantly can't support this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion. Senator from Nicholas. Senator from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I rise reluctantly to oppose the bill as well. And I want to begin by giving kudos to my good friend and colleague from Putnam for his efforts in advancing the interest in broadband technology within our state. It is vitally important that West Virginia be wired to the world from an internet connectivity standpoint. It's incredibly important for residents, for businesses, and for economic development. What I would suggest to you, though, is that the best way to deliver broadband, any type technology, frankly, is through the private sector. And when we encounter a problem, which West Virginia acknowledged has at some of the lower ends of the spectrum in terms of broadband availability, not that much lower, though, than the rest of the nation. I have the Broadband Availability in America report, and West Virginia has been expanding our broadband reach exponentially over the past several years. Incredible progress in terms of internet availability and speed delivery. It's been really, frankly, from a technological revolution, very impressive. Very impressive. And I just want to list some of the companies that have invested in West Virginia and some of the investments they've made. AT&T, over the past 2 years, has invested over $300 million. And you know, anybody cuts a ribbon in their district for $1 million investment or a $2 million investment, You know, we're sending off signals and flares, and it's a great day in West Virginia. AT&T, with 1,200 employees in West Virginia, has invested $300 million over the past couple of years to expand broadband availability. The cable industry, Charter, Intellos, Suddenlink, and Shentel and some of the others, since the year 2000, has invested $2.5 billion, over $300 million a year in private sector investment to expand broadband availability and speeds in West Virginia. I'm very proud to work for Frontier Communications that's also invested lots and lots and lots, millions of dollars, and employs over 2,000 West Virginians and has invested over $300 million to expand broadband availability in West Virginia. Mr. President, there are solutions to problems that we confront that don't involve the government. We don't always have to turn to the government to solve technological issues. In fact, I'm very fond of quoting, many of you, all of us use PCs, technology. Moore's Law is a law, it's sort of an axiom that since 1970, computer system speeds and technologies doubles every 2 years for the same price. And you can think back in your own mind, you know, the PC that you bought 2 years ago is twice as fast, or the PC that you bought now is twice as fast as the one you had 2 years ago, and it's the same price. So that's Moore's Law. Many of us are familiar with it in the technology industry. Had government been involved in that, you think there would be a Moore's Law? Government would say, PC technology and Intel speeds are not fast enough. They're too slow, so the government's going to get involved and invest in this technology and fix it. Wouldn't work. Technology, innovation, capitalism, the things that make America flourish are best done in the private sector. This bill, with all of its good intentions, calling note to an issue in West Virginia, in a reverse sort of way, can damage the investment in West Virginia by these private sector companies that sit in their boardrooms and make capital decisions based on the availability and the market potential in a state. They allocate their capital based on that. The capital allocations are chilled when they know that the government is going to be competing with them. It's just a fact of life. You put your capital where you get the most bang for the dollar. I would just suggest that we reject this very well-meaning proposal by a gentleman, my great friend, who is on this issue and has made advancement on it through other means by calling attention to it. But this, frankly, from my perspective and the industry's perspective, is not the right way to expand broadband availability in West Virginia. And for those reasons, I would respectfully ask that you reject the gentleman's bill.
Further discussion. Senator from Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of the bill. I recognize that we look at this as a significant investment within the state of West Virginia. I look at it as an investment in rural West Virginia. I can remember back in the 60s and 70s, I hate to date myself that way, but at any rate, when they were talking about the Appalachian Corridor system throughout the state of West Virginia. Somebody had a vision to build it. The comment was sort of, if you build it, they will come. There was a lot of highway built within the state of West Virginia in various locations in rural West Virginia where people wondered why they built those roadways in the locations that they did. What's fascinating is that once they were built, business and industry popped up around that corridor system, and West Virginia has benefited from that contribution that government made within those rural areas. I don't discredit the fact that You know, there have been tremendous strides made over the last several years throughout West Virginia in places where technology has benefited and companies have thrived. But in rural West Virginia, much of which I serve, when you consider that I serve 20% of the state of West Virginia, many of those areas remain unserved or underserved. I'm sure that there's areas in southern West Virginia that are very much the same way. When you look in Logan County, Mingo County, we can go and look in Monroe County. Those are underserved areas within the state of West Virginia. There's not going to be a lot of impetus to invest money in those locations. Why? Because there's not a good return on that investment. We've got to begin investing in locations in order to drive business and industry into rural locations where we can capitalize on the wonderful natural resource complement that we have within the state. And therefore, Mr. President, I would urge passage of the bill.
Further discussion? Further discussion? The senior senator for the 8th to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I get into, what I've been working on here, I do want to address a few things. First, there's talk about the report about the new investments in the state of West Virginia, about how far West Virginia has come as far as broadband connectivity. But I ask your residents, ask your citizens, how much of that they've felt. I know a delegate that lives 1 mile away from the interstate in Clay County that doesn't even get a megabyte speed of internet. I know that there are over 7,000 customers in the state of West Virginia that still hear the dial tone because they have dial-up internet service in the state of West Virginia. Mr. President, they talked about how government isn't in the broadband business in our states. Well, I can tell you that there's a 2,000-mile, middle-mile network built by the state of North Carolina. A government-owned open-source network in the state of North Carolina that was built. I don't see companies running away from that state, Mr. President. I see that state flourishing. I see that every single one of their educational universities decided and worked with the state government to connect the ring to do what they can to provide internet services, online services for people that want to progress themselves in education. Let's get back to this report, though, because the report did show us moving forward a lot. But one of the things highlighted in the report that companies and everyone against this bill fails to mention is West Virginia is rated 48th in the United States. 48th. That's what that report says. We've moved up. We've moved up. But we've moved up to 48th. That's where we are. 1 in 4 jobs in the 21st century economy are created in technology. 1 in 4 jobs. If you're a company looking to build a technology firm, and you see West Virginia's 48th, are we first on your list? Are we going to get that investment? We're not going to. You want to diversify an economy? You want to get West Virginia a diverse economy? This is the way to do it in the 21st century. If we're going to continue just to rely on the extraction industries, which I love, we're going to watch when commodity prices fall, that our state budget is going to fall. That we're going to be in this fiscal dire straits that we sit in today. Mr. President, I have to say that I want to diversify West Virginia's economy. I want to see a robust economy. I don't want to keep our eggs in one basket anymore. Talking today, I'm not just talking about the interests of the people of West Virginia that come in and visit us here, but I'm standing up for the ones that can't communicate with us because they cannot connect to the internet to talk to us. I'm talking for the people of West Virginia who can't work on the global economy, who cannot compete, and they've been blocked from it because of our internet connectivity here in the West Virginia. We expect our citizens to use resources, to set up businesses, to begin careers, to teach themselves new skills, but this infrastructure doesn't provide the means and the internet access for them to do that. Apple sends out a report about people that create apps and all the money that goes from all those app purchases. West Virginia is by far 50th in the United States for app developers. Those are people that are creating businesses out of their garages, out of their homes. We're last by far per Apple's study on that, Mr. President, and it's because of our infrastructure. We talk about offering an equal voice to every constituent in the state, but our infrastructure, our broadband infrastructure, reflects none of that equality. Because you leave the urban areas in West Virginia, our rural residents have no equal voice because they can't even get online to send us an email here at the Capitol. We get our emails. We can't always sit in our offices, but at least we can get our emails, and they can't even send us one. We try to talk about our students, about helping our students. You know, in 2010, Berkeley County started using Edline, a resource where when schools are not in session, they can still communicate with their teachers. And per the REC decision, Mr. President, we have to offer an equal playing field for all 55 counties when it comes to education. I'm sorry, if you set up Edline in Pocahontas County, if you set up Edline in Logan County, Boone County, the residents can't use it. Your students can't use it. So we're violating the REC decision in the fact that we can't offer an equal playing field for education. You want to talk about the homework gap, something I love talking about. The homework gap is when a student goes home to access the internet to be able to do their homework, to improve their lives. Mr. President, we have the largest homework gap in the nation. Our students go home and they can't get the resources they need to complete a term paper. They can't do it. They can't take online classes to retrain themselves. Our coal miners that need to access online skills to be able to be educated, they don't have the internet connectivity to do that. Mr. President, I know this bill doesn't change all that. It doesn't. We don't have the money to go ahead and just build 2,500 miles and hope that they will come. But, Mr. President, this bill takes an approach, a very determined approach, and a deliberate approach to try to do this responsibly, to try to build that interstate backbone that we don't have in West Virginia. Yesterday on this Senate floor, we passed the last mile build. The bill to help with last mile, those off-ramps into the community. But, Mr. President, without an interstate system, we're only building the off-ramps for one company. And that's it. He talked about Moore's Law, my gentleman from Jackson. I'll tell you this. If Moore's Law was the case, then why is Frontier only investing in building copper in West Virginia for the majority of their build-outs and not today's fiber technology? That's what we're seeing built, is copper. Saying that if we build this fiber, which moves things at the speeds of light, can handle more infrastructure, more service, if that's what we are building here, and we're saying that's going to be outdated, then why are we saying, great, this cap funding that West Virginia is getting for expanding internet, we're building copper with that, and hoping, and only requiring 10 megs, when the national definition is 25. This is going to move us up. This is going to help our state. This is going to help diversify our economy. I'm tired of looking at my brothers and sisters who don't live in West Virginia, that can't find jobs here in West Virginia, seeing all the peers of my age group flock out of this state to North Carolina where that government system is built, Mr. President. Government has a job, and I'll tell you, their job does rely on infrastructure. Other states don't have to do this because their population density is much different than ours. We have a population density that doesn't get that huge return on investment, and that is government's job to assist, to make sure that all West Virginians have an equal opportunity for success or failure. And I'll tell you, Mr. President, without this type of infrastructure, we aren't even giving the people of West Virginia the opportunity to succeed. I ask for your all support in this piece of legislation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Question for the Senate, shall the bill pass? All those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. The clerk prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk close the machine, ascertain the results on this question. 29 yeas, 5 nays, 0 absent, and not voting. More than a majority of those present and voting having voted in the affirmative declare the bill passed.